So today's lecture, by myself, Thomas LaClaire, I have been the historian. I'm finishing up my 4th year. Time flies when you're having fun. Yeah, so I'm getting ready to start the 5th year. All right, in today's lecture, it would not be fair for me to stand up here without recognizing Norm Wagner. A lot of people know Norm. We even have Norm's daughter in the room, Patty's here. But long before I came back to Clayton, he gave a lecture in 2001. When I say came back to Clayton from my military days, but in 2001, he gave a lecture on the naming of the village streets. He did it right in this building, but he did it on the first floor. All right? So we do have that on videotape, but I've also taken that lecture. I listened to it, quite honestly, about 15 times, and I typed it up. All right? I would like to say that I typed it up word for word. Probably not exactly word for word, but awfully darn close. So much of what I am going to be talking about today is due to the special thanks of Norm, because he laid the foundation. All right, in today's lecture, to find out the naming of village streets, it would go without saying, unless I studied the maps, I would not know what most of the street names are. All right, so I'm just going to show you the earliest map that we know of is 1825, and it's the village of Cornelia, before Clayton was named Clayton. There's a larger one over here, and I did see many of you earlier on with your cameras taking pictures, and that's good. Patty's going to provide this lecture online, like she has with all the other ones, and copies of these maps will be additionally in the lecture, in that one. So 1825, and there's 5 streets that are named on this map, and we're going to be talking about those a little bit later. All right, 1847 is the next map that I'm aware of. There may be others, and if there are others and you know of them, bring them to my attention. By 1847, hard to read, but this only captures a few streets. Webb Street, Calvin Street, and I'm going to ask you, what's Calvin Street? Yeah, well, that's on here. It's the the Webb and Calvin purchase. You're going to know more before this lecture is over. All right, 1855 map of Clayton. I do not have this one blowing up, but you can see it here. Some of the streets remain the same name. Sometimes we see streets that change, and we don't always know why they changed. We search, I search, but if I can't find it, then we have to speculate, and you'll learn more about that as the lecture goes on.
What's that, Phelps Mills?
All right, that is actually, so it was on a map plane, and they had Phelps Mills on one half of it, so I cropped that part out. All right. How we got onto the same map plane, I don't know. But obviously you see the plan of Clayton. All right? Here we got an 1864 map. I'm going to suspect most of you have seen this map. I think of all the old maps of Clayton, this is the one that I see the most. If I'm doing any kind of research, I go online, I open up books, newspaper articles. This map seems to have gotten used many times. And the one really, really nice thing about this map, you can't see it real good, but it has the names of all the homeowners. All right, maybe not who was living in that house, but most particularly the homeowner. All right, because that's who was on the map, as far as.
This is before the train.
This is before the trains? Yes. If you look, you don't see too many train tracks up in that corner. I don't have a pointer on me. But yes, this is before the trains. And I'm gonna ask you, when did the trains come? About 1873. All right, so this is about 10 years before the trains arrived. All right, 1872 map. Now this right here is primarily, it lists the lots, the lot numbers, and it doesn't list all of them. There's some blank ones, and we couldn't really figure out why there's some that were blank on some of the streets. And I've shared this one online on Facebook, and people that own houses said, well, my location of my house doesn't have a lot number. I don't know why. It had some, it has most of them, but it does not list names, it lists the lot numbers. So if you're doing research on your home and you want to know exactly when it got built, this could be a helpful map because it will tell you the lot number of where your residence is. All right?
Was there any corresponding index to the lot numbers, Tom? I've never seen that.
I have not seen that, no. If we went out to the Watertown clerk's office, you might find bits and pieces. You're not going to find one documented list, lot number in order. You would literally have to go through all the deeds, and we're talking a lifetime of work. Yeah. All right, 1887 map. Again, this is the second map that lists a lot of the names. Again, these are very helpful when doing history as a historian. Obviously, but as you're doing history on your own home, your own residence, you can see who lived. And a lot of these names should coincide, again, with what you're going to find at the clerk's office in Watertown. When houses were bought and sold, just like today, there would have been a deed transfer of some kind. All right? So what I'm showing you real quickly is I had access to a lot of different maps. We wonder, how many old maps do we have? Well, I'm showing you some of them, and I'm still just up to 1887. All right? 1912. All right? So this is just a piece of one. And one of the streets that I'm going to be talking about later is the Old State Road. Everyone knows where the Old State Road is? Well, you wonder, well, why is it called the Old State Road? It's just past St. Mary's Cemetery on your right. Right? Well, this map helped me identify why it's called the Old State Road. And we'll talk about that more. All right. Now this is a Corbin Studio production here, a picture, circa 1915. I actually have that one on display over here. That was part of the display that was going on, and I worked with the Hutchinsons, and now I'm the proud owner of that map. So I'm happy with that. But again, it helps me, this particular map helped me identify some of the names as the village actually got a little bit expressed out a little farther. All right. So I use all these maps, any clues that I can find. All right. June 1924 map. This one zones in particularly on Island View. So right across from the Clayton golf course. All right. So you got all these street names in there. When it was first developed, it was not part of the village of Clayton. It was its own little housing area. It has now all been accepted into the village of Clayton. Does anybody know when it happened? Yeah, all that area. We're going to be talking about that a little later. So I'm teasing you a little bit. Trying to, just like a good teacher is going to not give you all the answers right up front. I want you to listen. I was supposed to actually ask you a few questions to test you at the end, but we didn't get to do that. So here's a 1970 street map of Clayton. All right. So again, you don't see things on there that I see, but names of streets that might have changed, or how far the boundaries of the village. The village actually has expanded a little bit at times. come in a little bit. All right, and this is the newest map that I used, 2021, and there is a copy of it there. So this particular map shows a lot of the streets that none of the other maps showed. And you'll see Brooks Drive, Cantwell Drive, Wall Street, Strawberry Lane. All right, they may have been streets, but they weren't on maps so much. But they're definitely on this one. All right, so now we're going to get into what I'm going to call the body of today's lecture. The way that I kind of have it set up is I'm not going to go through the streets alphabetically. I'm going to go kind of chronologically. When do I think that street was named? Where did I first kind of see it on the map? And we'll go from there. So Alexander Street, all right? I think it's first, it'd probably be helpful for me to talk just briefly about the LaRae family. All right? There was Jacques LaRae, which name is John. His son was James. His son was Vincent. And Vincent had a lot to do with the layout of the village. All right? Well, you're going to find a lot of the names that are in the streets are LaRaes. All right? So here we got Alexander Street, first listed on the 1825 Cornelia map. By 1872, it is called Alexander Street, and it was named for the son of James LaRae de Chaumont. This is Vincent's brother. All right. Now, it was one of 4 streets that was renamed. All right, and when I say renamed, to what is it today? Alexandria. And you're going to ask me, why is it Alexandria Street? And I'm going to give you the best answer. We don't know. All right? We don't know why it went from Alexander to Alexandria. What I surmise, it was a typo on a map through the years and was just accepted as so. Because on several of the earlier maps, it does show that it was Alexander. And I'm going to look at my notes. So it was listed as Alexander on the 1855 map, as well as the 1864 map. But then when 1872, and what else happened in 1872? But our village was organized, all right? And on 1872, it's Alexandria. And from the most part, it has been Alexandria since that time. But every once in a while, you will find Alexander. Somebody who's just trying to say, well, it used to be Alexander, I'm going to use that name. I, as a historian, whenever I see Alexandria, my mind's seeing Alexander. All right? So that street has been around ever since the village, but even previously, 1872. All right? That's when, 1825 is what I should be saying. That's one of the oldest streets in the town. There's 5 that are equal. All right. James Street, all right, also listed on this 1825 map of Cornelia, and named for James LaRae de Chaumont. Now again, Vincent LaRae is the one that did this map. This is his father, all right? So he's recognizing fathers. He might be recognizing brothers. He may be recognizing sisters. You will see more. But one of the busiest streets in the village, obviously so. Everyone coming into town is pretty much going to go down James Street, all right? It's always been James Street. I don't believe it'll ever change and become anything else. I hope it doesn't. All right. All right, John Street, okay? I will tell you right now, I'm giving you little snippets of this information because I didn't want to get too much information on the slide. When you leave today, Linda in the back has sheets of paper that gives a little bit more information on every street that I prepared, and you're also going to get one of Norm Wagner's talk that I typed up if you want those. So she's prepared to give those to you as you leave today. All right? So, again, John Street, named for James LaRae de Chaumont's father, Jacques. But Jacques is John. All right? So you all knew this already, right? All right. Mary Street, again, on the very first 1825 map. So if you own a village, you create a village, you're going to name it after your mother, your father, your brothers, your sisters, and that's exactly what they did. All right? So Mary Street, named for James Lorraine de Chameau's mother, which was actually Marie, but Mary is what she was called. Jones, and this is her maiden name, de Chameau. All right? So moving on. Sounds a little boring, but at the same time, it tells you how did these streets get their names. Theresa Street, listed on the 1825 map. I think this is the fifth one, so you're going to stop hearing me say this over and over, but on the Cornelia map. Named for James Lorraine de Chameau's daughter, Theresa. Also named for the town and village of Theresa. I just threw that in there. It's just an extra little tidbit. All right? And did they live in Clayton and on these streets? No. They were just names that when Vincent was here, and Kate Vincent is after Vincent Lorraine de Chameau, and he's just taking care of his family members, making sure they're recognized. A lot of them are still over in France. All right? State Street. All right? In the year 1834, all right, the village was still a very new area. There was boat building, a little bit of boat building going on. There was a lot of sawmills, lumbering business. But villages along the river were starting to pop up. So New York State said, well, we need to do basically a census, a survey, and make sure that we have proper roads into these new communities that are popping up. So in 1834, the state law was to build a road. And it was noted on an 1835 road survey of Clayton. All right? Other names, state highway, state road, Route 12. But I said no, longest road in the village. All right? From the sign coming into Clayton, from both directions, it ends up being about the longest stretch. But it's a village road only in the sense that it's in the village, but the state maintains it. All right? But I did want to talk about it. State Street. Webb Street. Now this is one of the ones when if you think back to the 1847 map, it was called the Webb and Calvin Purchase. All right, it's on this side of Clayton. First noted in an 1834 street survey, listed on the Webb and Calvin map of 1847. I only know him as Mr. Webb. I don't know what his first name is. There are several Webbs, but I don't know which one. We know it was the gentleman that was part of the Webb and Calvin Purchase, but all I know is Mr. Webb and Mr. Calvin. All right? If anybody knows more, let me know. All right? So Mr. Webb, though, was one of the first to buy land from Vincent Lorraine de Chameau. So Vincent, he was the one that was basically, his father deeded him all his land. And it's huge piece of property. It's not just Clayton Village, it goes out farther. But Mr. Webb approached Vincent and bought part of what we would call the village. And that's where Webb Street gets its name. Huguenin Street. All right? Is it Huguenin? Is it Huguenin? I always say Huguenin. All right? Someone might argue with me, but it's an unnamed street on the Cornelia map of 1825, but it is listed on the Webb and Calvin map of 1847. So somewhere between those years is when it was formally named. I went to the TI Sun, they don't have any articles from 1847 or before. I'm just joking. Yeah, but they don't. But named in honor of a ship captain, Robert Huguenin. And we know that through the Huguenin house and some of the history that comes, and doesn't take much if Robert Huguenin owned this house, and now the street has the name. All right, could have been his father, but everything tells me that it was after the ship captain who sailed on the Lake Ontario quite a bit, also was involved in shipbuilding in the area. On some of the maps, I have found other names that spelled a little bit different. you'll see NAN instead of NIN. So, but the NIN is the one that you're going to see on most of the maps. All right, so we got ship captains that are involved. We have family members that are involved in the naming of the streets. All right, so I talked about Calvin. It's all part of that Webb and Calvin purchase. Those two were in business together. And obviously in the Webb and Calvin purchase of 1847, all right, early history says there's an Alpheus, I'm pronouncing that right, Calvin, and a Delano or Delano Calvin. I do not know. I only know Mr. Calvin. All right. This is, again, number one of the 4 streets that's renamed, or what I'm calling 4 streets. And we renamed Franklin Street, and we see that on the 1855 map. So sometime between 1847 and 1855, Mr. Calvin may have ticked somebody off, and said, I'm out of here. Well, it was named Franklin Street. And there's only one Franklin that we can think about that it was named after, and it has to be Benjamin Franklin, who was a very close friend and political ally of the LaRae family. And Benjamin Franklin had gone over to the LaRae's home over in France on several occasions. All right, so it all makes perfect sense, logically, at least to me, that it's Franklin Street. But what happened to Calvin Street? We don't know. We just know that Calvin Street is no longer, as of 1855, a formal street in the Clayton Village. Merrick Street, all right, also listed on the 1847 Webb and Calvin map. Yes, of 1847, in honor of shipbuilder Elbridge G. Merrick. He played a very important role in the beginnings of Clayton and the shipbuilding, and we see his name on several. If I go into Jefferson County and I look at board of supervisors and schools and taking care of the poor, and his name is quite well. So he was not just Clayton, he was very involved in the county. And eventually he moved to Detroit, where a lot of the shipbuilders from this area were hired to go to Detroit, where they make more money. But other names, the same name, but it was different spellings. You will see it 1 R versus 2 R's. You might see it with an A versus an E, but today it's pretty much accepted as Merrick. So just like my name's LaClaire, you might see it LaClair, you might see it LeClair, it might have an E on the end, but same idea. Merrick Street, just different. But this one, again, shipbuilding. So shipbuilders, ship captains, very important part of our early history, and it's captured in our street names. Water Street, okay? So you ask yourself, if you didn't read the whole map, where the heck is Water Street? We got a lot of water nearby Clayton, all right? Well, in the 1855 village of Clayton map, it's up along the river, all right? It's right in our downtown, all right? So it was called Water Street for many, many years. But in 1922, it was renamed Riverside Drive. And that, again, is one of our 4 streets that's renamed. I was going through the village minutes, and I'm reading one of the pages one day, and it basically said that a petition was submitted by members of residents of Clayton Village asking the board to rename Water Street to Riverside Drive. Didn't give any explanation. Motion was given to the board members, and it was approved. Motion closed. So why did they not like Water Street? To me, it sounds like a pretty nice street. It's up along the water. But for some reason, they said, no, we can do better. It's the riverside, not the water. All right? So it's up against the St. Lawrence River. Makes sense that it's riverside. But that happened in 1922. June of 22, to be specific. All right? Other unofficial names. All right, River Street. I'm reading in the village minutes, and I saw it, River Street. All right, there's postcards out there calling it Main Street. I literally just saw on Facebook yesterday where one of the photographers, professionals in the area, took a picture, and somebody asked, where was this picture taken? And I didn't reply. Someone else said, that's Main Street in Clayton. All right, so that's what people would say, and it was the main street in the downtown. However, the formal name, as you all know, is Riverside Drive. Today was Water Street. Gardner Street, all right? Everybody know where Gardner Street is? It's not one of those streets you're going to see on most of your trips in and out of town, because it's kind of tucked away toward the back. But it is listed on the 1855 Village of Clayton map. It's near the causeway. It's actually the lead to the causeway heading out to Washington Island. And it's named for Mr. William Gardner. And the only thing that we know is I was talking about the 1864 and the 1887 map and the list of residents, and you got this little road, and you look at the map and you say, oh, the Gardners lived on that road. So again, logically saying, it was named in honor of the Gardners who lived there. And not Gardners as in digging up soil, their last name was Gardner. All right, owner of land on that side of the village. All right? So, again, it's not a street that most people see on a daily trip into Clayton. You're going to see James Street. You're going to see Webb Street as you circle around. But you have to be looking for Gardner Street. James Street. Now, I've been learning a little bit. I actually learned something just last night, and I was able to update the slide for today. So, in Norm's 2001 lecture, he said James Street was named in honor of the sister of shipbuilder and Captain John Oates. And I haven't, I'm going to trust what he's saying. He's a very smart man. He knew the village so much better than I ever will. All right? But I've never seen it anywhere else. Well, I just happened through the Genealogy Society. I know a lady that lives out in Watertown, and she told me a while back that she researches the Oates family because her connections. So I said on a whim, I said, let me send her a note. And I said, Ann, I was told that James Street was named in honor of Jane, the sister of our shipbuilder, Captain John Oates. And she replied almost within a minute and confirmed and said, that is true. And were you aware that Jane is buried in the Clayton Cemetery? Which I was not. All right? So she actually showed a picture of the headstone, and it's Jane Oates Roselle, and she died in 1898. The street was listed a lot earlier in 1855, probably before she was married. But, these are important people, shipbuilders, and he must have known people that were naming the streets, but it's after Jane Oates, who lived in Clayton and died in Clayton, and is buried in Clayton. James Street, not a LaRae, an Oates. William Street, all right? Another one of our streets that's renamed, all right? Also listed on the 1855 and 1864 street maps, but on the 1872 map, it is now called Union Street, all right? You'll see there, we suspect in the honor of Civil War Union soldiers. I have not been able to find in the meeting minutes or any other publication showing why it changed to Union, but it was soon after the Civil War. So it only makes sense that it was named in honor of the Union soldiers. And many villages around the North Country have Union streets. So unless somebody has a different idea, we're going to go with Civil War soldiers for Union Street. But again, what happened to William? Why did they choose that street to rename? I do not know the answer to that. All right? And William Street was probably a LaRae. Though I'd be honest with you, I didn't even check that out. But I'm going to have to check that out. Just thinking about it just now, who was William Street after? And I do believe that was a LaRae. Reese Street, all right? So everyone, who knows where Reese Street is? Again, it's one of those streets that you're not going to bump into, but it's out there as you drive around Riverside Drive and come around the village. Anyway, so in the Village Minutes. Now, early this year, and maybe even part of last year, I went over to the village clerk's office with the permission of the mayor. She's in here somewhere. There she is in the back. I took out all the village minutes from 1872, and with my brand new camera that was bought for me by the village, I just literally took pictures of every page. All right? Wasn't reading them, I just took pictures. Ended up being a couple thousand pictures. But I got them down by volume and page number. So I'm reading one night when I could have been watching TV, but I chose to look at village minutes instead, and I come across, first approved in 1875. They called it Reese Lane. And it says, named in honor of shipbuilder, village president, who was also mayor at one point, Thomas C. Reese. Other names, I saw it renamed Reese Street soon after 1875. But it was Reese Lane in the early days, and it just went right down to essentially French Creek area. All right? So we know that we have a lot of Reeses that in our history of Clayton. But Thomas Reese, again, shipbuilder and previous mayor. Mayor, one of your co-workers. All right, Bartlett Point Road. All right, again, one of those names in history that we've heard over and over. All right, one of our first permanent settlers, Mr. Bartlett. We do not have a first name for Mr. Bartlett, and I've looked at books that were written in the 1880s, 1890s, and all they ever say is one Mr. Bartlett. All right. But anyways, he was one of the first permanent settlers. He did not stay in the area too long, 2 years, but he put a mark on where the Bartlett Point Road is. Now you can imagine he lived over. All right, but he came to this area again under appointment from the LaRae family. He settled the area that carries his name, Bartlett Point, noted in the 1878 Jefferson County history. Right. What I do not know is at what point did it become an actual village road versus a village, it's just the road out there called Bartlett Point. Right. Nowhere can I find it. I'm going to guess that when the LaRae family set up Cornelia back in 1825, it was probably soon after, because Bartlett was in that era. All right. They probably just called it the Bartlett Road, but it goes down to the point, so it became the Bartlett Point. Mayor, did you accept this as a village street in your tenure? No, long before you. All right, but that's where the Bartlett name came from. Beecher Street. Now this is one of those streets, I would probably say honestly, of all the streets in the village, this is the one that I really wanted to find out, where did the date come from? Because Norm said in his 2001 lecture, he says, we do not know where Beecher Street got its name. There was no Beecher families in the town. Where did it come from? So I took it as a personal challenge of myself to find out where Beecher Street got its name. So I'm looking through the village minutes. I kind of narrowed it down into this 15-year era, and I'm reading the pages. And the first entry I found was basically talked about, and there's a name on here, I think, let me check my notes, but there was an Edwin Steele who lived on that road, and this is the road leading up to the school, all right? It said that Edwin Steele receives permission in 1897 to build a stone walk in front of his house. So I said, cool. So I know that people were living there in 1897. All I need to do is back up a few years, and I'm going to find in the village meetings when the street was essentially, ordained or organized or whatever we want to call it. And it was never listed. It just, all of a sudden one day, popped up, Beecher Street is a Clayton Village street. The only thing that I could think of, and I did some Googling, In 1813 to 1887, there's a Henry Ward Beecher, an American clergyman and abolitionist of slavery. All right? So he's the only Beecher. We know that there was no Beecher families living in Clayton. There were none on the census report. So I have speculated, and it's just speculation, that it was named in honor of this gentleman who would have been famous in his day. All right? So it's listed on the 1898 Sanborn map, which I showed a little bit earlier, a piece of it. I said the gentleman that received permission was 1897 to build. He died in 1887. So sometime between 1887 and 1897 would I speculate that street got its name. So in this job, sometimes you have to speculate. And that's one of them. The old state road, I talked about that earlier in the beginning. So at one point, we have the state road that comes over McCarnes Hill. All right? Has not always been the state road over McCarnes Hill. At one point, and this was in 1912, they did a major road improvement. You would come out of DePaulville, you'd go to the Seaway, basically where the golf course is, and you would have taken a left down what is called Green Eisen Road. You would have gone up to almost where you're heading toward Beeshaw's Cheese Factory, the Fernal Road, and you would have taken a right, coming right out by the cemetery, and taken a left into the village. You would have bypassed McCarnes Hill. That was in 1912. So I was doing some research, and in the old newspapers, there's talk of the road on McCarnes Hill as early as 1909, 1908. But it's essentially, it's a dirt road. And in one particular article I read, it talked about the car going up McCarnes Hill, got stuck in the snow, stalled, and came right back down to the bottom of the hill going into the ditch, and somebody got hurt. Because there was no state road in 1912. It was just essentially dirt roads. All right? So the formal road, again, went around McCarnes Hill, came out by the cemetery, and then in the 1930s, when they put a little bit more effort into Route 12 and they came over the hill, that road now became the old state road. It's no longer the state road, but locals called it the old state road because that's what they were familiar with. All right? So that's where it gets its name. All right? And it was one that I often wondered about. So, all right, Green Eisen Road. Sharon Barkman talks about when she was learning to drive that she would have to go to that Green Eisen Road. You'd come up to where Route 12 connects, and it was on a hill. And she said it was always tough to keep that shifter to where you didn't coast back down the hill. And I can understand that. All right, so. All right, let's move on. Bain Street, all right, near Centennial Park. The shortest road in the village, all right? I was thinking about it earlier this morning. Most of the driveways in the village of Clayton are longer than Bain Street. All right? But Norm made one interesting observation back in his 2001. He goes, yes, it's the shortest road in the summer. In the winter, if you're trying to get up Bain Street from down real close to the river, it can be almost like the longest street because it'll take you a long time to get out of there if the road is icy and snowing. But per the village minutes, Main Street was named in June of 1914. All right, in honor of Dr. Alexander Bain, who literally had a house right there. Let me see, it was documented in the village minutes, as I said, 1914. A motion was approved that the street between Dr. Bain and J.G. Wilson's land be named Bain Street. The motion was approved. 1914. All right. So if we got any famous people in here, maybe someday a street's going to be named after you. Grave Street. All right, so Grave Street is one of those where we haven't been able to determine the exact day that it became a formal village street, but the Graves family has owned property that side of town, all of Grave Street, going out East Line Road, since 1843. All right, Sue Grant, and sadly, if you weren't aware, Sue Grant just recently passed away. But I had talked to Sue on many occasions. But she had told me that her ancestors initially built that road to bypass a toll road. East Line Road used to come into basically Junior Street. In the earliest days, back in the 1830s, 40s, that was a toll road. And she told me her great-great-grandfather built the then dirt road that we now call Grave Street to bypass the tolls. And it was on his personal property, so nobody could challenge him. But he always drove around so he didn't have to pay tolls. All right? And that road's only been paved in a lot of our recent lifetime. I don't, do you know right off the top? It was like the 60s, I think, maybe 70s.
Because it was a cow path.
Yeah.
You know, it ended by Harold Fox's house there, where the school bus garages and Timmy Pacific's house.
Mm-hmm.
That was where it was paved to, and from then on, it was a two-tire width road until it was paved. All that development up, but it was all swampy up in that area there, by where the fire station is now, the dental office,
Right.
the National Grid. That was all real swampy area.
Absolutely. And we did have one of the descendants of the Graves who was also a mayor of Clayton for a year. He died like in the last week of his term. All right, or something like that. All right. So when it became a village street is unknown, likely after the 1920s, and it's not seen. If you look at the maps, Grave Street is not on many of the maps till about 1920. You start seeing it pop up. But it was a dirt road long before that. East Line Road, all right? In the early days, a toll road. Again, this is what Sue had told me. So, in an 1849 street survey, they called it the Line Road East. All right, so it's the eastern part of the village, and it was owned by Samuel Putnam. All right, Putnam. In 1924, on all these streets, I did research into old newspapers. There's several old newspaper sites, and I'm always typing in the street name to see what is the earliest newspaper hit that I can find on any of the streets if I don't see them on a map. All right, but in 1924 newspaper article, the road was first seen in print as being named East Line Road. So probably again in the early 1920s, probably right about the time that Grave Street got its name, is when they came on board as village streets. I've gone back to the village minutes. I've been looking. I have not found where there was actually a notation in the village minutes.
Who collected the toll?
Who collected? Probably would have been state. It was a state road in the early days.
And how much was the toll?
You're gonna research and find out and let me know. I am guessing it was very, very inexpensive to us. It may have been pennies.
Right.
But back when those roads were first built, they were built by hand. They did not have the machinery that we have today. So somebody had to pay the wages of the individuals that cut down the trees, leveled. They were bringing in stone and dirt from wherever they could find it. Right?
How far did it go out?
How far did East Line Road go?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer. It's on earlier maps going right over to the town of Orleans. So if you go Route 3 today, that street has been around. I don't have the exact date, but it would have 1870s, 1880s. So that road was there. All right, here's a lot of streets in one. I did all this to save you sitting through like 10 slides. We got Cornelia Ave, Cartier, Emory, Mercer, Sherman, Swart, River Shore, Frontenac. And where are they all? Steele's Point. All right? And they all got accepted in one swoop. All right, February 19th, 1940. Now, if you recall, in 1924, I had a map up there. All right, that's when that housing area for cottages primarily was developed by the Wagner and Albright Company out of Rochester. All right, they came up and they saw this beautiful village and said, tourists were coming in. We need to have a place, we want to have a place where we can make all these beautiful little cottages and we're going to make good money. Well, they did, all right, and they owned it for 10, 12, 15 years roughly, and then they sold it to other developers within the village, people that lived here, all right, but again in 1940, so from 1924 to 1940, up until that point, these were streets, but they were not village property. All right, Cornelia Avenue, named after Cornelia, the first name of our village. Cartier, Jacques Cartier, who sailed up the St. Lawrence River in 1534. Emery, Charles Goodwin Emery of the Calumet Castle fame. He had a granite company, and his docks for the granite company were right down there by Steele's Point. Mercer, the Mercer boat building family. Okay, Sherman Avenue. All right, George Sherman of the Sherman Paper Company out of Watertown, who owned most of that land at one point. Swart Avenue, after John Swart, who had a meat market right down on Water Street. All right, and if you look in the Corbin book, you will see pictures of the Swarts in their meat store. River Shore Avenue goes because it's up along the river shore, and Frontenac Boulevard, after what Norm mentioned in his talk, you got Frontenac Springs, you got the Frontenac Hotel. Which one? But Frontenac was an important name for early village. If I were to guess, probably the Frontenac Hotel. They might have been able to see it right off of the point at one point. Right? So there's a lot of streets, all one swoop, 1940. The people that ran the Department of Public Works in Clayton said, "Oh my goodness, my work doubled overnight." Brooks Drive. All right. So, did you know that originally known as Frank Field? Has anyone heard that before? All right. So, Norm Wagner, I think, mentioned that in his talk. All right. It was that area where Brooks Drive was purchased by Brooks Lumber. All right. S. Stanley Gerald Ingerson acquired the property in 1966. He probably acquired it a little bit before, but he deeded the street to the Clayton Village. And that also I have found in the village meeting minutes, so I have the exact date. All right? So I've done newspaper hits on that, and everything started to pop up right about 1966. So it makes perfect sense. I think I actually had a hit from 1965, but it was formally in the village minutes in 1966. But that's Gerald Ingerson, who donated a lot of land to the village. And he donated some on East Line Road, and just this summer, the bridge was dedicated, the Ingerson Track, is what they called it. Cantwell Drive and Cantwell Terrace, all right? So a lot of people know the Cantwell family. There's still a lot of descendants still remaining today, but Robert Cantwell donated the street. It first started in 1967, and the street, even though it's not extremely long, it was actually done in segments. And as I read the village minutes, when he would go to donate land, the village said, "Hold on, you improve this part of the road, then we'll take it." You know, they didn't just take it because I'm guessing, in my own words, that he was hoping maybe the village would take care of it and save him some money. The village said, "Oh, hold on, we want the street, it's good, but you need to do the improvements before we accept the deed." Yeah, so, but 1967, 1976, 78, and 1986, those were at least 4 times where I saw pieces of that street deeded to the village. So it's been done in bits and pieces through the years. All right, Cantwell Terrace is up there, that's newer, but it's all still part of the Cantwell family donating land to the village. High Street, this is an interesting one, at least I thought it was an interesting one, because it's up by the school, today Gardino Elementary, but Norm has said in his lecture that it was after it's the high point of the village, all right? I did not know where the highest point of the village. I would have never thought that where the school is the highest point in the village.
Probably at the time.
At the time.
At the time.
At the time. That's right. All right? So that's how it got its name. Now, it was already called High Street in 1939 when Clayton Central School was built. But it was not a formal village street. It was just people would nickname, you know, hey, go on up to High Street, you know. So there was a roadway there. There was a dirt path. All right? When the school was first built, you know, they were talking about paving the road, all right? But as I stumbled across it, I'm reading through the village minutes, and it says that we are going to do some improvements on High Street in 1968, and at that time, after the improvements are over, we are going to take it on as a village street. So, even though the school's up there, I'm sure that the village was taking care or helping to take care of that street, but 1968 is when it formally came on board as a village street. So just because streets are out there and you might see village workers on it, not always is it a formal village street. Wall Street, all right? For the village minutes, Wilbert Wall, who is still living today, deeded the road to the village on February 26, 1966. All right? So there was other properties. 1966, the village was expanding as far as streets. All right? I was told that in the early years it was known as Wall Drive instead of Wall Street. All right? I won't say too much, but it was talking about in the village minutes that after Wilbert donated the land, he wanted to see certain things happen, and he came to one of the meetings and says, I want all my property back. He never got it back.
Wilbur would never say that.
He did. To my knowledge, he never got it back. So I'm sure that they came to an agreement, but something was done in the earliest years that Wilbur was not happy about. All right. Dulles Lane, North Shore Drive, South Shore Drive. Everyone knows, you just mentioned it a minute ago. Say it again. Bartlett Point. That's what you mentioned earlier. All right. So I did not know this until I read it in the village minutes. I haven't seen it anywhere in newspapers account. But originally these were streets in what was called the Bartlett Harbor Estates. All right. And then Robert Purcell was behind the development of that area. Is there anybody in the room today that can back me up on this? All right.
I don't think it would be the Robert Purcell that we know.
Not the Robert, okay. Could be, that could be.
I would say that would not, I think that would be the Robert Purcell that was in Cape Vincent. There was a Robert Purcell family there.
Okay.
Who was very active.
That's good information to know.
I'm just speculating. It's all speculation.
All right. So I will go on record and say that there was the Bartlett Harbor Estates. This is in the village minutes, and they accepted it on January 2nd, 1968. And it talks about these three roads. You got Dulles Lane, and I say to myself, where did Dulles Lane, like some of our other streets in the village, there was no Dulles families living in Clayton, but the Dulles name was very popular. You got the Dulles office building in Watertown.
John Foster Dulles.
Yeah, and he was secretary. Yeah, all right. I can only speculate that's where the name came from. All right. North Shore and South Shore Drive, or
He was tied in with Robert Purcell of Cape Vincent.
Yeah.
good
Yeah,
to know.
they were diplomats of some level.
All right, I did not know that. I did print off street information. So right, and when you get one of those handouts, write Robert Purcell of Cape Vincent. All right, because I did not know that. All right, so moving on. Park Drive. Everyone knows where Park Drive is?
Yep.
All right.
It's another short street.
It's one of the shortest streets, so that's going into the parking lot of Ciro Arena off of James Street. And I was talking to the folks up at the DBW, and in the earliest days, that road ended right about where the last house was, and there was a gate, all right? And it only got opened for certain people at certain times, mainly for the village to do maintenance. Today, you can drive right straight into the parking lot, and then you can come right back out the other side on East Line Road, all right? But I checked on the coming in from East Line Road, it's not called Park Street, all right? I can't even remember, but it wasn't. Park Street is only just that one little, there's like 3 houses essentially that it's, and those houses are right up along James Street. But that's one of the newest roads. Ciro Arena first opened to the public in 1974. And the street was named very close to that time. I did not find it in the village minutes, the exact, but I do know, and I've talked to the first maintainer up at the arena, he says, yes, that street was called Park Street right from the beginning. Park Drive, not street. They're all streets, but some are called Avenue, some are called streets, some are called Washington Avenue. All right. Been around for a very, very, very long time. All right? Now, the island was likely named after President George Washington. Now, I got looking at some of the first few presidents. There was Jefferson, Adams, and Washington. But between those 3, well, there was Jefferson County, so it wasn't called Jefferson Island. There was Adams, New York, and that one's been around, one of the earliest villages in the area. It wasn't called Adams Island. So George Washington was one of our first 3 presidents, the first president, and so I speculate that that's where the name came from. But the causeway going out to Washington Island was not called Washington Causeway or Washington Road or Washington Street, all right? In the very early minutes, and I found this in one of the history books, it was called Johnny Cake Lane, and I thought that was interesting. I had no idea what a Johnny Cake is. Maybe it's a breakfast item. I don't know. All right, but it was called Johnny Cake Lane in the earliest. None of us would have ever been around when it was called Johnny Cake Lane. But did you know that Washington Island in the earliest days was busier for production? There were sawmills, shipbuilding. In the earliest days, French Creek was kind of like a population center. Washington Island. Down here, even though it was slowly coming around, Washington Island. If you wanted to go where the hub of activity was, that's where you went in the earliest days.
So that was long before the causeway was built.
Yeah, probably. There's been several causeways. There was causeways back in the day too, but they didn't last long, so they weren't built with a solid foundation. But it talks about Johnny Cake Lane as being the causeway. But how sturdy it was, I do not know the answer. All right. Now, I did talk to the name S. Gerald Anderson's son. All right. So he said the causeway was improved around 1978, and that's when the loop became a formal village street. All right. It's always been a loop there, but it became a formal village property around 1978. I found that surprising. Okay. Thought it was earlier. Strawberry Lane. All right. The extension across from Alexander/Alexandria. I put both names up there because I'm going to call it Alexander. Once known for strawberry fields, strawberry picking. So if you lived in Clayton and you wanted to go strawberry picking, you went up to Strawberry Fields or Strawberry Lane, and that's where you picked the strawberry, long before there was much property out there. All right. The board approved the village street on August 29, 1978. That's about the time buildings and the medical centers and things are starting to pop up. But that's when it got its formal name.
So they don't have strawberries anymore?
Maybe in some of the backyards of some of the buildings, you still may find some. Alright. But Strawberry Lane. And it is called Strawberry Lane to this day. It's not called road or street, it's Strawberry Lane. Alright, so they kept that one for historical purposes. Purcell Drive. Again, we're into some of the newer ones. The village board approved the naming of Purcell Drive September 21st, 1982, named in honor of our Robert Purcell, I'm going to say, who served as Clayton mayor from 1977 to 1986. Now you can see he was a mayor up until 1986, so the street was named in his honor during his actual tenure as a mayor. Right? One of the movers and shakers. Right? In the future, we're going to have a Zimmer Road, aren't we?
You know, Tom, it might not be a bad idea in that to identify that as Robert E. Purcell.
All right.
I don't think it was Robert E. Purcell in the Cape.
I can't remember that.
And I, now that I know that, I will note that in my records for sure. When this is all said and done, I'm going to put a binder together that's going to be in the Thousand Island Museum. It's going to have Norm's talks. It's going to have the sheet that I put together. It's going to have a copy of this lecture. And I will make sure that, so if anyone's doing research, that they can recognize the two different individuals. All right, Joseph Lonsway Drive. All right, so 801 military housing. All right, came into town. They had the grand opening about 1986, and was formally approved by then again Mayor Robert Purcell. Made a motion that we call it Joseph Lonsway Drive in honor of, to my knowledge, our only Civil War Medal of Honor recipient who was buried in the Clayton Cemetery. And so he made that motion, and it was unanimously approved. Okay. Bay Lane. All right. Does anyone know where Bay Lane is? All right. Heading out of town. All right, go past Cantwell Drive, Cantwell Terrace, and this is. Yeah, I don't know all the people that live on it, but it's just, there's not a lot of homes there. But this one, even though it's new, I couldn't find a lot of information. I thought for sure if I go to the Watertown Daily Times, that now has all their online versions, I said, I'm going to find this one real quick. No, I did not. I ended up talking to Kelly Cantwell, who's a fellow graduate of mine, graduated in 1979. And he says, Tom, he said, that street hadn't even been around for more than 10 years. He says that it's off Cantwell Drive, it's overlooking the St. Lawrence River, Carrier Bay. In the very earliest days, and we're only talking 10 years ago, it was called Carrier Bay Lane. But then it was getting confused with Carrier Ridge Road, which is almost the next road. So I don't know who made the decision, but they dropped the carrier off and it became Bay Lane. And if you drive up there today, like I did a few days ago, and the sign says Bay Lane. Alright? Alright? But Carrier Ridge is the town road, so the border of the village and the town is in between Bay Lane and Carrier Ridge. Alright? You knew that, didn't you, Norma?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm glad. She's here to make sure I don't screw up. Hungerford Point Road. Alright? Just across the French Creek Bridge. It was named after, and I'm going to say James Montrose and Stanley G. Hungerford of the Hungerford Hardware family. What you may not have known, though, it is not a formal village street. A lot of people know it, people can drive on it, but it is not a village street. The street has water and sewer, but the village does not follow the road. That was what was told to me when I was doing some research. I would not be surprised that at some point this will become a village road. Maybe not. I got some heads shaking now in the room. All right. Front Street. The Theresa Street extension that goes across 12 State Road. All right. This is in the French Creek Marina property. And again, not a formal road. Now, you're going to find street signs out there. That's the odd thing. So you're driving up, you look up, And they may call it South Front, or they may call it Front. But it is French Creek property and not a village property. All right, I think this is like my next to last slide. Gayhead, I thought this was pretty important to mention. All right, a lot of people, our ancestors, our parents, our grandparents, they know Gayhead. And Gayhead is where the Thousand Islands Clayton welcome sign is. All right, welcome to Clayton. And it was called Gayhead because Gayhead indicates a piece of an area of property where there's water on 3 sides. So you have French Creek, you got the St. Lawrence River, all right, and you got Goose Bay. All right, so back in the day when they didn't say Jane Street, they didn't say State Street, they didn't say anything. Meet me at Gayhead. And everybody knew where to meet, all right? And so that's where the welcome are. But the Gayhead, again, I don't have, it's from early Clayton. I mean, long before 1872. We're talking back in the 1830s and 1840s, they called it Gayhead. And I thought that was interesting to know.
In the middle of the village park, you can see the river.
Yep, there you go. Very good. All right. One other thing that I wanted to leave today, and you have to study the maps. You got Goose Bay. Now, in the earlier days, they came in and they blocked a lot of the streets. So, like if you wanted, for example, John Street, you could only get to so far up to John Street, and then you had to turn around and come back out to the state road to hit the other part. Because the bay used to come on in, or Webb Street and all that. A lot of those have been filled in. Well, they've been filled in over the years. And it took a lot of work, a lot of dirt, a lot of stone. And Robert Purcell, I think, talked about, even in his days, they were bringing in fill to fill those land. You go down by Lions Field and it dips down. Right? Yeah. What's that?
Used to be the dump.
Yeah, it used to be the dump because it was all water. It was a swamp, right? In front of Surefine, all right? Norm talked about some of the early people literally went bullhead fishing in front of where Surefine is today. And that was all swamp, right? And they've been filled in through the years. So a lot of our streets have changed in that sense. All right, so I mentioned on here before you leaving, study the maps. Hopefully everyone signed in and got their complimentary gift. Thank you for coming today to get one of those gifts. We also have a cake. I'm going to invite Norma up now. Norma wanted to say a couple comments. Yes. Oh, I didn't even ask for questions yet. Yes.
When you get to questions, I'll ask.
All right, let's do questions.
So, in the beginning of my political career, in the mid-90s, we were talking about naming of streets and roads and so forth. And lanes, and this is what I was told, that lanes were typically driveways, people's private driveways. And when when they came by and did the 9/11 mapping,
Yes.
so like our driveway at our house became Taylor Lane. Montrose Lane, which was Jim Montrose, lived on that. So a lot of the lanes were private driveways. And there were, I think at that time, there were, like Carrier Bay Lane was a driveway. It wasn't a village road. And Strawberry Lane and Lover's Lane were the two exceptions to that.
Okay.
And so there was a debate down on the Bay Road where Bear Lane is. They wanted to name it Bear Road, and we didn't want it to be named Bear Road. Following the lane is a private driveway, and so emergency responders and mail people and other people would know that it was a private road rather than a public road.
How about Avenue? Any?
I think it had to do with where they were located, but I don't have anything on avenues.
And I got these lanes, I got these avenues, but I never did take that step to research. I guess I was trying to find all of them in the village minutes. But that brings up an interesting point, and I will do some further research. Why a lane? Why an avenue? Why a street? Why a road? Right? Because there's all these different, and they mean something. All right, any other questions? I know we're running, we're at 1 hour and 10 minutes. Sorry that I'm running a little bit longer, but good information.
Tom, on the roads, when you talked about when, like, Gerald Ingerson would give a road, would give property to the town or the village.
Yes.
Back in that era, when there was a lot of development going on, the government set a policy that said if you want to develop an area and you eventually want to give that road to the municipality, you have to build the road to a certain standard. And so like up on Heritage Heights, he built the roads, he put the septic, the pipes were all put in there, and so it's always been a topic of great debate.
Yes.
If the roads were properly built, because if they weren't, that the burden would come back onto the taxpayers when they were dedicated.
Yeah, and I was talking about that with the Cantwell.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I never really got into Heritage Heights because that's never been a village, so I wasn't finding that one in the village minutes.
Another interesting conversation for history was what was the original boundaries of the village and when it was, and what was expanded.
Well, I do have the original 1872 spelled out, but in that they talked about, you know, the oak tree and the large rock, and so find those points today is almost impossible. But I do know that they've changed through the years, and then after it changed, someone said, no, let's change it back. So, but we're talking not huge changes, but there's some.
I've got a thank you for the Wall Drive deal. Because we're doing the asset management plan.
Yes.
And it shows on there that it doesn't belong to the village.
Well, I can tell you, I can give you the page on the village minutes where the board accepted it.
Yeah, that was great to hear.
Now again, he said he wanted it back, but I found nowhere where it was given
I'm
back.
not gonna start that for you.
No. Let's not.
Follow the street.
And I think right along with that was when a street was given to the village or the town, there had to be an accompanying survey that clearly articulated the length and the width of the demarcation points.
Yeah.
So and that was not done until, I mean.
Just easier to swing in.
Norma, why don't you come on out front? And while you're coming, there's 2 individuals that have helped me every week. There's many individuals that have helped me, but 2 in particular. I want to, Patty, you've been taping all of the programs, putting them all up online. Thank you. Linda, you've been taking care of the attendance, the food coming in. Thank you. All right. And again, many others have been helping out in many areas, but those 2 week after month have been here, never called in sick, never gave me excuses, always here.
I want to thank everyone for coming today, and this kind of wraps up 150 years, so enjoy a piece of cake, and I've got a little token for your Christmas tree with a little heart on it. So it was a great effort by Tom, who is our esteemed historian, and the Chamber of Commerce, who had told us right up front, don't come to us, we got enough on our plate right now. And they were there every time we asked them, especially Mike. So thank you, Mike. So it's been a great job. It really has been fun, a lot of work, but it's been fun. It's nice that we're wrapping it up, and we're gonna kick off another 150. So enjoy.
Yeah, I'm going to throw you down. I always held these programs at the Thousand Islands Museum. Linda Schiller, you were one of the first to bring this program. It's an opportunity to get people out in the wintertime for hashing over history, but also history at noon we do in the summer. So for the upcoming year, we are coming back to the Thousand Islands Museum. Please continue to attend those events. Not because they're not here, but because come to the Thousand Islands Museum. We need your participation to keep the history alive in this village. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.